Human rescues alien orphan. Now every warrior race wants him dead, reaches its dramatic peak as Gale, Kira, and former enemy Lyra form a three-way psychic bond in the ancient crystal chamber. Their minds merge in profound understanding, unleashing a powerful mindstorm that momentarily paralyzes the pursuing Alliance fleet, transforming mortal enemies into allies and revealing the true purpose of the Cathara. Not conquest, but consciousness, cultivation across the stars. The red emergency lights painted the metal corridors in an eerie glow as Gale pressed his back against the cold wall, listening for any sign of movement. The slave ship's atmosphere recyclers hummed with a rhythmic pulse that masked the sound of his footsteps, but not the hammering of his heart against his ribs. 3 years since he'd left military service, and the familiar rush of adrenaline still felt like an old friend. Gale checked the holographic display projected from his wrist device. According to the intel he'd purchased in the Outer Rim trading post, this Vectari slave transport carried at least 20 Altarian captives, humanoids valuable for their natural affinity with quantum mathematics. The deeper he ventured into the bowels of the ship, the stronger the stench of unwashed bodies and fear became. "Just get in, free the Altarians, get out," he muttered to himself, a mantra he'd repeated on dozens of similar missions. After the Warrior Alliance War, the outer sectors had become lawless frontiers where slavers operated with impunity, trafficking sentient beings to work in remote mining outposts or as indentured servants for the elite. Gale wasn't foolish enough to think he could save them all, but each life rescued was one small victory against the darkness that had consumed his own life 3 years ago. A security panel blocked his path, its alien script glowing with a sickly green light. He attached a small device to its surface, allowing the universal decryption algorithm to work its magic. Within seconds, the door hissed open, revealing a corridor lined with containment cells. "This isn't right," Gale whispered, consulting his schematics again. According to the ship's layout, this should have been the main holding area for the Altarian captives. Instead, each cell contained various species, none of them the blue-skinned Altarians he sought. A muffled sound caught his attention, different from the ambient noise of the ship. He moved cautiously toward its source, an unmarked hatch at the far end of the corridor. The encryption on this door was more sophisticated, requiring nearly a full minute for his device to crack. When the hatch finally slid open, Gale found himself staring at a small, dimly lit chamber, unlike the other holding cells. No restraints, no prisoner waste disposal units. Instead, the room contained what appeared to be a sealed, transparent pod, its surface frosted with condensation. Inside the pod lay a small figure, no larger than a human child, covered in fine silver fur that shimmered under the emergency lights. The creature's chest rose and fell with slow, labored breaths. Gale hesitated. His mission parameters were clear: rescue human and humanoid captives only. Alliance relief funds didn't stretch to exotic species, especially those with unknown physiological needs. And yet, he reached for the pod's control panel, seeking some information about its occupant. The moment his fingers touched the surface, a jolt of warmth spread through his hand and up his arm, so unexpected that he nearly drew his weapon in reflex. The creature's eyes opened, large, luminous orbs of deep violet that fixed on Gale with an intensity that seemed to penetrate his very soul. In that instant, Gale felt something he hadn't experienced since the death of his family: connection. A distant alarm began to wail. "Damn it," Gale muttered, making a split-second decision. He activated the pod's emergency release, ignoring the warning symbols flashing across its display. The transparent cover retracted with a hiss of escaping gas, and the small, silver-furred being shivered as the ship's recycled air touched its skin. The creature made no sound as Gale carefully lifted it from the pod. Its body was surprisingly light, almost weightless in his arms, but radiated an unnatural warmth. Large eyes never left his face, studying him with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. "I hope I don't regret this," Gale said, securing the small being against his chest with one arm while drawing his pulse pistol with the other. "Let's get out of here before—" The corridor outside erupted with the sound of heavy boots and shouted commands in the guttural Vectari language. Gale's translator implant rendered their meaning clearly enough. "Intruder alert! Secure the specimen." Specimen, not prisoner or slave. Something about that distinction sent a chill down Gale's spine as he backed away from the door, seeking another exit. The memories of 3 years ago flashed unbidden through his mind. Mercenaries storming his family's settlement on the agricultural world of New Harvest. Their mission hadn't been to capture, but to eliminate. His wife and daughter hadn't stood a chance against military-grade weapons. Only his combat training had saved him. Though saved seemed a hollow word for what remained of his life afterward. He'd vowed then that he would never again stand by while innocent lives were threatened. Even if this creature wasn't human, the way it clung to him now, trembling slightly but making no sound, awakened something protective within him. "Hold on tight," he whispered to the silver-furred being. "This is going to get rough." The first Vectari guard who burst through the doorway met a swift end as Gale's pulse pistol found its target. The second managed to fire a wild shot that scorched the wall inches from Gale's head before a second pulse blast silenced him permanently. Gale moved quickly, stepping over the fallen guards and into the corridor. The small being in his arm seemed to understand the danger, pressing itself closer to his chest and remaining perfectly still. With his free hand, Gale activated his neural implant's combat mode, enhancing his reflexes and sensory perception. The corridor ahead branched into 3 directions. His memory of the ship's layout suggested the port maintenance shaft would offer the most direct route back to the docking bay where his ship waited. But the sounds of approaching guards from that direction forced him to reconsider. "Change of plans," he muttered, selecting the narrower corridor to his right. This route would be longer, but might avoid the main security response. As he moved swiftly through the dimly lit passage, the small creature shifted in his arms, its violet eyes fixed on something ahead. A moment later, Gale's enhanced hearing picked up the faint sound of a weapon being charged. He dropped instantly to one knee, bringing his pistol up just as a Vectari security officer emerged from a side passage. 2 quick shots, and the threat was neutralized. But the brief exchange would certainly draw attention. Gale glanced down at the silver-furred being in his arm, a new respect forming. "You heard that before I did, didn't you?" The creature's only response was to blink slowly, its gaze never leaving his face. They continued through the maze-like interior of the slave ship, Gale relying on both his memorized schematics and the uncanny awareness of his small companion to avoid the worst of the security response. Twice more. The creature gave subtle warnings, a slight tensing of its body, a shift in its gaze, that allowed Gale to prepare for encounters before they happened. When they finally reached the maintenance accessway that led to the docking level, Gale faced a sealed pressure door with no obvious control panel. "This wasn't on the schematics," he muttered, searching for some way to bypass the obstacle. The sound of pursuing guards grew louder behind them, their heavy footfalls echoing through the metal corridors. The silver creature suddenly reached out with a delicate, 4-fingered hand, touching the featureless metal surface of the door. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, to Gale's astonishment, frost began to form around the creature's fingers, spreading rapidly across the door's surface, until the entire barrier was covered in a thick layer of ice. A hairline crack appeared in the center, then another, until the entire door was webbed with fractures. With a sound like breaking glass, the frozen metal shattered, leaving the way clear. Gale stood momentarily frozen himself, staring at the creature in his arms. "What are you?" he whispered, But there was no time for answers as the shouts of their pursuers grew closer. Gale stepped carefully through the shattered doorway and into the maintenance shaft beyond, a vertical tube with ladder rungs embedded in its walls. Climbing one-handed would be challenging, but there was no alternative. Gale secured the silver being as best he could against his chest and began the ascent, each movement carefully measured to maintain his balance. 3 levels up, the maintenance shaft opened onto the docking bay access corridor. Gale's ship, the Nomad's Respite, waited just 50 meters away, its security systems already responding to his proximity by initiating pre-launch sequences. The final stretch proved the most dangerous. As Gale emerged from the access corridor into the main docking bay, a full squad of Vectari security forces opened fire from defensive positions around the bay. Energy bolts sizzled through the air around him as he sprinted for the Nomad's open hatch, using cargo containers for cover where possible. The silver creature pressed its face against Gale's chest, trembling now with what might have been fear. "Almost there," Gale assured it, though he had no idea if it could understand his words. A searing pain lanced through his left shoulder as an energy bolt found its mark. Gale stumbled, but kept moving, the ship's hatch now just meters away. Behind him, the shouts of the Vectari security chief grew more frantic, ordering his troops to capture, not kill. With a final desperate lunge, Gale crossed the threshold into his ship. "Emergency departure protocol!" he shouted to the ship's AI as the hatch sealed behind him. "Now!" The Nomad's engines roared to life, their vibration shaking the deck beneath his feet as the ship broke free of its docking clamps. Through the viewports, Gale could see Vectari troops scrambling for cover as the backwash from the engines swept across the bay. Only, when the slave ship had dwindled to a distant speck among the stars, did Gale allow himself to relax his grip on the silver-furred being. Carefully, he set the creature down on the medical berth in the ship's small infirmary, noting with concern that its breathing seemed more labored than before. "Ship, run a full bioscan on our guest," he ordered, wincing as he peeled back his damaged armor to examine his own wound. The energy bolt had scorched a path across his shoulder, painful, but not life-threatening. "Unable to complete bioscan," the ship's AI responded. "Subject physiology does not match any species in database." "Great," Gale muttered, applying a medical patch to his shoulder. "Just tell me if it's in immediate danger." "Subject shows elevated stress markers, but no critical physiological failures. Atmospheric composition is within acceptable parameters for most carbon-based life forms." The silver creature watched Gale's movements with those unnerving violet eyes, its small chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Despite its alien appearance, there was something undeniably childlike in its demeanor, vulnerable and trusting. "I don't even know what you eat," Gale said, rummaging through his supplies for something that might be universally digestible. He settled on a nutrient solution designed for emergency use by most humanoid species, offering a small amount in a shallow bowl. The creature sniffed at the liquid but made no move to consume it. Instead, it reached out with one delicate hand, its fingers stopping just short of touching Gale's injured shoulder. "It's fine," Gale assured it. "I've had worse." The creature tilted its head, then closed its eyes. A sensation of cool relief spread through Gale's shoulder, diminishing the burning pain of the energy weapon's damage. When he pulled back the medical patch to look, the angry red of the wound had faded to a pale pink, as if days of healing had occurred in seconds. "That's quite a trick," Gale said quietly, meeting the creature's gaze again. "Thank you." For the first time, the silver being's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. In the privacy of his ship, with the immediate danger behind them, Gale found himself face to face with the consequences of his impulsive decision. He had just stolen what appeared to be a valuable specimen from a Vectari slave ship, a species unknown to his ship's extensive database, with abilities that defied explanation. The smart move would be to drop the creature at the nearest neutral station and disappear back into the anonymity of the outer rim. But as the small being curled up on the medical berth, its silver fur catching the light with each breath, Gale knew he couldn't abandon it now. "Looks like we're stuck with each other for a while," he told the creature, receiving only that same enigmatic gaze in response. "I'm Gale, by the way. Not that you probably care." He set a course for Kepler Station, the nearest relatively safe port where he could gather information and supplies. Whatever this creature was, someone would know, and someone would pay handsomely to get it back. The trick would be finding out who and why without ending up dead in the process. As the Nomad's respite slipped into hyperdrive, Gale couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. Kepler Station hung in the void, like a mechanical spider, its 8 great docking arms extending from a central hub that glowed with the light of countless viewports. Once a mining outpost on the edge of contested space, it had evolved into a bustling trade center in the uneasy peace that followed the Warrior Alliance War. Here, species from 100 worlds mingled in a chaotic blend of commerce, intrigue, and occasional violence. It was also one of the few places where Gale could count on finding reliable information without too many questions asked. Entering final approach to Kepler Station, the ship's AI announced, "Station control requests identification and purpose of visit." "Send the usual," Gale replied, keeping one eye on the silver creature who now sat in the co-pilot seat, seemingly fascinated by the approaching station. Salvage trader seeking supplies and maintenance. In the 2 days since their escape from the Vecteri ship, Gale had learned little about his unusual companion. The creature ate sparingly from the selection of foods he offered, seemed to require less sleep than a human, and continued to watch Gale with those unsettling violet eyes. Most notably, it had not made a single sound. No speech, no cries, not even the equivalent of a sneeze or cough. Yet, despite this silence, Gale had begun to sense a growing connection between them. At times, he would find himself reaching for a tool only to discover the creature was already holding it out to him, or turning to check on his passenger at precisely the moment it seemed to need attention. "We need to find out what you are," Gale told it as the station loomed larger in the view screen. "And I know just the person who might have answers." The creature tilted its head, a gesture Gale had come to recognize as curiosity. "But first, we need to keep you hidden. Kepler isn't exactly known for its hospitality toward unauthorized visitors." From a storage compartment, Gale retrieved a hooded cloak he sometimes used for protection against caustic atmospheres. It would be oversized on the small creature, but should serve to conceal its distinctive appearance. "Arms up," he instructed, demonstrating the motion himself. To his surprise, the creature mimicked him perfectly, allowing Gale to slip the cloak over its head and adjust it to cover its silver fur completely. Only those luminous eyes remained visible within the shadow of the hood. "Good enough," Gale decided. "Stay close to me and try not to attract attention." The docking procedure went smoothly, Kepler's automated systems guiding the Nomad's respite into an assigned berth with mechanical precision. Gale paid the docking fee electronically, wincing slightly at the cost, but knowing better than to haggle with station authorities. As the airlock cycled open, the sounds and smells of Kepler Station washed over them, a cacophony of voices in dozens of languages, the metallic tang of recycled air, the underlying odors of too many species living in close proximity. The silver creature pressed closer to Gale's side, one small hand clutching the fabric of his jacket. "Just act natural," Gale murmured, stepping confidently into the crowded docking concourse. "Or as natural as possible." They moved through the throng of travelers, traders, and station residents. Gale, nodding occasionally to familiar faces, but avoiding extended conversation. His destination lay in the station's lower levels, away from the official commerce zones and security checkpoints. A service elevator carried them down 6 levels, the atmosphere growing progressively less regulated with each floor they descended. By the time they reached sublevel 6, the corridors were dimly lit, the walls covered in layers of graffiti in a dozen languages, and the air heavy with the sweet, sour smell of illegal substances. Gale led his silent companion down a twisting series of passageways until they reached a nondescript door marked only with a faded symbol that resembled a stylized eye. "Tobias?" Gale called, rapping his knuckles against the metal surface. "It's Gale. I need your expertise." A series of electronic clicks and whirs indicated multiple security systems disengaging before the door slid open to reveal a cluttered workshop. Every available surface was covered with dismantled technological components, ancient paper books, and glowing holographic displays. In the center of this chaos stood Tobias Reed, a thin human with wild gray hair and skin the color of burnished copper. His eyes, augmented with microscopic lenses that clicked and adjusted continually, widened at the sight of Gale. 3 years of silence. "And now you appear at my door?" Tobias exclaimed, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of Earth's African territories. "The last I heard, you were hunting Victari slavers in the Cygnus sector." "Good to see you too, old friend," Gale replied, stepping inside and gesturing for the cloaked figure to follow. "I need information, and you're the only person I trust not to sell me out before I finish asking the question." Tobias snorted, pushing aside a pile of components to clear space on a battered couch. "Flattery will cost you extra. What sort of information are we talking about?" Instead of answering, Gale turned to his companion and gently pulled back the hood of the cloak, revealing the silver-furred being to Tobias's augmented gaze. The effect was immediate. Tobias stumbled backward, his artificial eyes clicking rapidly as they cycled through different scanning modes. "By all the stars," he whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" "That depends on what you think it is," Gale replied cautiously. "I was hoping you could tell me." Tobias approached slowly, his expression shifting from shock to fascination. "May I?" he asked, extending a hand toward the creature but stopping short of touching it. The silver being looked up at Gale, as if seeking permission or reassurance. "It's okay," Gale told it. "Tobias is a friend, he won't hurt you." After a moment's hesitation, the creature turned back to Tobias and inclined its head slightly. With reverent care, Tobias ran a scanner over the silver being's form, muttering to himself as data streamed across the device's display. "Incredible. Cellular structure unlike anything I've seen. Energy readings off the scale." "Tobias," Gale interrupted. "What is it?" The old scientist straightened, his augmented eyes fixing on Gale with an intensity that was almost frightening. "What you have here, my friend, is a Cathara, a member of the Cathara species. And if my understanding is correct, it may be the last of its kind." "Cathara," Gale repeated. "I've never heard of them." "Few have, outside of certain academic circles and high-level Alliance military briefings," Tobias replied, gesturing for them to sit. "The official position is that they were extinct, wiped out during the early conflicts that eventually led to the Warrior Alliance War." The silver creature, the Cathara, climbed onto the couch beside Gale, its violet eyes never leaving Tobias as he spoke. "Why were they wiped out?" Gale asked, a sense of foreboding growing within him. Tobias sighed, collapsing into a chair across from them. "Fear, primarily. The Cathara possessed abilities that the warrior races found. Disturbing. Telepathic talents, emotional manipulation, thought transference, what they called proximity bonding. The ability to create psychic links with other sentient beings." "Mind control," Gale translated grimly. "No, not exactly," Tobias corrected. "From what I understand, it was more complex than that. They couldn't force others to act against their will, but they could share thoughts, memories, emotions, break through language barriers and cultural divides. In theory, They could have been the greatest diplomats the galaxy had ever known. But the warrior races saw them as a threat, Gale guessed. A threat to the very foundation of their societies, Tobias confirmed. Imagine species built on rigid hierarchies, martial values, and strict control of information, suddenly faced with beings who could bypass all that, who could make a general feel the suffering of the enemies he ordered killed, or help slaves share their experiences directly with their masters. The Cathara had drawn closer to Gale as Tobias spoke, its small body now pressed against his side as if seeking comfort. "So they were exterminated," Gale said softly, unconsciously placing a protective hand on the creature's shoulder. "According to official records, yes. A coalition of warrior races, the Keth, the Vectari, the Dorn hegemony, united specifically to eliminate the Cathara threat. Their homeworld was bombarded from orbit, their colonies hunted down one by one. Within a standard year, they were declared extinct." "Obviously, not entirely," Gale noted, looking down at the silver-furred being beside him. "Obviously," Tobias agreed. "Though I can't imagine how this one survived, or why the Vectari would have had it in containment, rather than simply killing it." The Cathara's violet eyes seemed to grow darker, a shadow passing across their luminous depths. "If what you're saying is true," Gale said slowly, "then we're in serious trouble. If anyone discovers I have a living Cathara, every warrior race in the Alliance will want it dead," Tobias finished for him. "And you along with it, for aiding the enemy." As if to underscore the gravity of the situation, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the station, its harsh electronic wail penetrating even the soundproofed walls of Tobias's workshop. "Attention all residents and visitors," a mechanical voice announced over the station's public address system. "This is a security alert. All civilians are ordered to remain in their current locations. Security forces are searching for dangerous fugitives. Repeat, remain where you are until this alert is lifted." Tobias moved quickly to one of his monitors, accessing the station's security feed. "They're not being subtle," he muttered, turning the screen so Gale could see. The image showed a squad of armored figures moving methodically through the upper levels of the station. Their armor was distinctive, gleaming white with gold accents, each helmet adorned with sweeping wing-like projections. "Keth Royal Guards," Tobias identified them. "Elite warriors from one of the most powerful houses in the Alliance." "How did they find us so quickly?" Gale wondered aloud, already gathering his equipment. "We need to get back to the ship." "I doubt that's possible," Tobias replied, cycling through different security feeds. "They've locked down all docking bays and established checkpoints at every major junction. This isn't a random sweep. They know exactly what they're looking for." The Cathara had risen to its feet, its posture alert, those violet eyes fixed on the door to Tobias's workshop. "Is there another way out of here?" Gale asked. Tobias hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Maintenance shaft behind that storage unit. It connects to the station's waste processing system. Not pleasant, but it should get you to the lower docking ring without passing any checkpoints." "That's our best option," Gale decided, moving toward the indicated storage unit. "Come with us, Tobias. It's not safe for you here once they track us to your door." The old scientist shook his head. "I'm too old for crawling through maintenance shafts. Besides, someone needs to run interference." He began activating various systems around his workshop. "I can trigger environmental alarms in other sectors. Maybe buy you some time." Gale knew better than to argue. "Thank you, old friend. If we make it out of this—" "Save it," Tobias interrupted with a grim smile. "Just try not to get yourself killed. And Gale," he glanced at the silver-furred Cathara, "be careful. There's more at stake here than you realize." Before Gale could ask what he meant, another alarm joined the first, this one closer and more urgent. "They're on this level," Tobias warned. "Go, now!" Gale pulled aside the storage unit, revealing the narrow access hatch behind it. "You first," he told the Cathara, who needed no further prompting to slip into the dark passage beyond. With a final nod to Tobias, Gale followed, pulling the hatch closed behind him, just as the sound of armored footsteps became audible in the corridor outside. The maintenance shaft was as unpleasant as Tobias had suggested, cramped, poorly lit, and thick with the stench of the station's waste processing systems. Gale and the Cathara crawled through a maze of narrow tunnels, guided by the small holographic map Tobias had uploaded to Gale's wrist device. 3 levels down and 2 sectors over, Gale muttered, more to himself than to his silent companion. Then, we should reach an auxiliary docking bay, where we might be able to find transport. The Cathara moved with surprising agility through the confined space, occasionally pausing to touch the walls, as if sensing something beyond the metal barriers. Each time, it would look back at Gale, its expression inscrutable but somehow conveying urgency. They had nearly reached their destination when the Cathara suddenly froze, its body tensing. A moment later, Gale heard it too, voices ahead, speaking in the clipped, formal tones of Keth warriors. "Sweep this section, and proceed to the lower levels," a female voice commanded. "The creature cannot be allowed to escape. House Keth's honor depends on it." "Yes, Commander Lyra," several voices responded in unison. Gale signaled for the Cathara to retreat, but the creature remained motionless, its violet eyes fixed on the end of the tunnel, where it opened into what should have been an empty maintenance bay. "We need to go back," Gale whispered, touching the Cathara's shoulder. The instant his fingers made contact, a surge of images flooded Gale's mind. Flashes of fire and destruction, worlds burning from orbit, silver-furred beings running in terror as armored warriors cut them down without mercy. And through it all, a sense of profound loss and determination so powerful it nearly brought tears to his eyes. The Cathara's message was clear. There was no going back. Before Gale could respond, the creature slipped from his grasp and darted forward toward the opening, moving with a silent grace that seemed almost supernatural. "Wait!" Gale hissed, but it was too late. The Cathara had already emerged into the maintenance bay beyond. Left with no choice, Gale drew his pulse pistol and followed, emerging into a scene of frozen tableau. The maintenance bay was occupied by 6 Keth warriors, led by a tall female whose armor bore additional insignia marking her as a commander. All 6 had weapons trained on the small silver figure that stood defiantly before them, seemingly unafraid, despite being hopelessly outmatched. "So," the commander said, her voice cold and precise. "The reports were true. A living Cathara, after all these years." She took a step forward, and the Cathara responded by raising its small hands, palms outward. The temperature in the bay seemed to drop precipitously, frost forming on the metal floor around the creature's feet. "Careful, Commander Lyra," one of the warriors warned. "It's preparing to use its abilities." Lyra's helmet retracted, revealing a strikingly beautiful face, with skin the color of burnished gold and eyes of brilliant amber. "Fascinating," she murmured, studying the Cathara with an expression that mixed disgust with scientific curiosity. "I never thought I'd see one alive." It was at that moment that Gale made his move, rolling from the maintenance shaft entrance to take cover behind a stack of cargo containers, his pulse pistol firing 3 rapid shots that disabled 2 of the Keth warriors before they could react. "Protect the commander!" one of the remaining warriors shouted, shifting his aim toward Gale's position. What happened next occurred with such speed that Gale's enhanced reflexes could barely track it. The Cathara thrust both hands forward, and a wave of crystalline energy erupted from its small form, spreading outward like a shockwave of winter itself. Wherever the energy touched, frost formed instantly, on the deck, the walls, the very armor of the Keth warriors. 2 of the warriors found themselves immobilized, their armor joints frozen solid. The third managed to fire once before his weapon froze in his hands, the energy bolt going wide and striking an overhead conduit that exploded in a shower of sparks. Only Commander Lyra seemed prepared for the attack, activating some form of energy shield that deflected the worst of the freezing wave. Even so, Frost rhymed her golden armor as she raised her own weapon, taking careful aim at the Cathara. Gale fired again, the pulse blast striking Lyra's shoulder and spinning her halfway around. But her armor absorbed most of the impact, and she recovered with the trained reflexes of an elite warrior, returning fire with a weapon far more advanced than Gale's outdated pulse pistol. The energy bolt struck the cargo container inches from Gale's head, melting through the metal as if it were paper. He ducked lower, preparing to fire again, when the station's alert system suddenly shifted to a higher pitch. "Intruder alert in Maintenance Bay 12C, the automated voice announced. "Station security forces responding." The situation had just become infinitely more complicated, caught between Keth warriors and Kepler Station's own security forces. Their chances of escape were dwindling by the second. The Cathara seemed to reach the same conclusion. It turned toward Gale, those violet eyes locking with his own, and he felt, rather than heard, its urgent command. "Run!" Without conscious thought, Gale found himself obeying, breaking from cover and sprinting toward a narrow accessway on the far side of the bay. The Cathara moved with him, its small legs a blur of motion as it easily kept pace. Behind them, Commander Lyra shouted orders to her remaining mobile warriors, but the chaos of alarms, sparking conduits, and spreading frost hampered their pursuit. The accessway led to a secondary corridor that, according to the holographic map still glowing on Gale's wrist device, connected to the lower docking ring. They ran without speaking, the Cathara sometimes pulling ahead to indicate a turn or warning Gale of danger, with subtle gestures that he somehow understood perfectly. When they finally reached the docking ring, they found it in a state of controlled chaos. The security alert had triggered evacuation protocols for civilian vessels, creating a stream of travelers rushing to reach their ships before the station locked down completely. "We need to find a ship," Gale panted, scanning the busy docking bays for opportunities. "Something small and fast." The Cathara tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward a sleek courier vessel whose loading ramp was just beginning to retract. "Good eye," Gale muttered, breaking into a run again. "Let's hope the pilot doesn't mind some unexpected passengers." They reached the ship just as its engines began to power up, sliding under the half-closed loading ramp and into the cargo hold beyond. The hatch sealed behind them with a pneumatic hiss, and moments later, the deck vibrated as the courier broke free of its docking clamps. Gale dropped to a sitting position against a cargo container, breathing heavily. The Cathara stood nearby, its silver fur glowing faintly in the dim emergency lighting of the hold. "That was too close," Gale said when he'd caught his breath. "They were waiting for us. How did they know?" The Cathara approached slowly, its violet eyes holding an expression that seemed almost apologetic. It reached out one delicate hand, stopping just short of touching Gale's face. Understanding dawned. "They can track you somehow," Gale realized aloud. "Something about your physiology or energy signature. That's how they found us so quickly." The creature inclined its head in what Gale had come to recognize as confirmation. "Great," he muttered. "So wherever we go, they'll follow. And now we're stowaways on a ship headed who knows where, with Keth warriors and station security both looking for us." The Cathara's expression shifted to something more determined. It placed a hand on its own chest, then reached out to touch Gale's hand. The moment of contact brought another flood of images and emotions, a distant world of crystalline formations and silver-leafed forests, a sense of sanctuary and purpose, and most strongly, a feeling of trust directed at Gale himself. "You want me to take you somewhere specific," Gale guessed, trying to interpret the fragmented impressions. "A safe place for your kind?" The Cathara nodded emphatically. "Can you show me where? Coordinates or a star system?" The creature's expression fell, and Gale understood the problem. Without words or a shared reference system, communicating specific navigational information would be nearly impossible. We'll figure it out, Gale assured it, though he had no idea how. First, let's find out where the ship is headed and decide our next move. He activated his wrist device's scanning mode, searching for information about the courier vessel they'd boarded. The results were not encouraging. Military transport, he read aloud. Bound for the Epsilon City outpost. He looked up at the Cathara with a grimace. That's an Alliance military installation. Out of the frying pan, into the fire. The creature tilted its head questioningly. It means we've traded one problem for a worse one, Gale explained. Epsilon City will be crawling with Alliance personnel, including representatives from the very warrior races that want you dead. For the first time since their escape from the Vectari slave ship, the Cathara's composed demeanor cracked, its shoulders slumped, and those expressive violet eyes dimmed noticeably. The sight stirred something protective in Gale. "Hey," he said softly. "We're not finished yet. I got you this far, didn't I?" He reached out tentatively, placing a hand on the creature's shoulder. The contact brought no flood of images this time, just a subtle warmth that spread up his arm. "I made a choice when I took you from that ship," Gale continued. "I'm not abandoning you now." The Cathara looked up, its eyes brightening again. It placed its own small hand over Gale's, and though no words passed between them, something indefinable shifted in their connection. A sudden lurch indicated the courier vessel had entered hyperspace. Wherever Epsilon City was, they were now committed to that destination. "We have some time before we arrive," Gale said, settling more comfortably against the cargo container. "Let's use it to plan our next move." As they sat together in the dimly lit cargo hold, Gale couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn his life had taken. 3 years of solitary existence, drifting from mission to mission, with nothing but revenge and a vague sense of justice to drive him forward. Now, he found himself responsible for perhaps the last survivor of a species thought extinct, a creature with abilities he barely understood, pursued by some of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Yet somehow, he felt more alive than he had since losing his family. The Cathara had curled up beside him, its small body radiating that peculiar warmth that seemed characteristic of its species. As it drifted into what appeared to be sleep, Gale found himself wondering about its story, how it had survived the purge of its people, how it had ended up on a Vectari slave ship, and what secret place it now sought to reach. "Kira," he said softly, testing the shortened version of the species name Tobias had provided. "I think I'll call you Kira." The sleeping creature made no response, but somehow, Gale felt the name was right. A small piece of identity reclaimed from a heritage nearly erased from the galaxy. As the courier vessel carried them toward uncertain danger, Gale made a silent promise to the small being beside him. Whatever awaited them at Epsilon City, they would face it together. Epsilon City rose like a malevolent eye in the view screen of the security monitoring station, where Gale had managed to position himself. The military outpost wasn't a planet, but a large asteroid that had been hollowed out and repurposed, its surface bristling with defensive arrays and docking structures. Around it orbited a complex network of smaller satellites, early warning systems, weapons platforms, and communications relays that formed a nearly impenetrable barrier. "Not exactly a welcoming sight," Gale murmured to Kira, who stood hidden behind a stack of supply crates in the cramped monitoring station. They had spent the 12-hour journey in the courier's cargo hold, emerging only when the ship began its final approach to the military outpost. Gale had used his military override codes, technically expired, but still functional due to administrative oversight, to access the security monitoring station, hoping to gather intelligence before attempting their escape. What he'd learned was discouraging. Epsilon City served as a forward command post for Alliance operations in this sector, with representatives from all major warrior races maintaining a presence. Worse, the facility was currently at heightened alert due to potential Cathara activity, a clear indication that news of Kira's existence had spread quickly through Alliance channels. "We need to find a way off this rock," Gale said, scanning through the outpost's ship manifest. "Preferably something small, fast, and with minimal security protocols." Kira moved to his side, those violet eyes studying the displays with an intensity that suggested understanding far beyond what Gale would expect from a child-sized being. The Cathara reached out toward one particular image, a schematic of the asteroid's interior structure. "What is it?" Gale asked, enlarging the section Kira had indicated. The schematic showed a network of natural caverns that predated the military installation, now used primarily for emergency shelter and storage. One particular chamber, deep within the asteroid's core, appeared to have been sealed off from the rest. "Is that important?" Gale wondered aloud, checking the facility's records for information about the sealed chamber. The official designation was innocuous enough. Containment Area 7X, decommissioned. But the security protocols surrounding it were extensive. Whatever lay behind those sealed doors, the Alliance military considered it significant enough to guard even when officially decommissioned. Kira's expression had grown more animated than Gale had yet seen, those violet eyes practically glowing with urgency. "You want to go there?" Gale realized. Not a question, but a statement. "Whatever's in that chamber, it matters to you." The Cathara nodded emphatically. Gale sighed, studying the security protocols again. "It won't be easy. Multiple checkpoints, biometric scanners, armed guards, and all of that assuming we can even reach the lower levels without being detected." Kira's determined expression didn't waver. "All right," Gale conceded. "But first we need a contingency plan. Even if we reach this chamber, we'll still need a way off the asteroid afterward." He returned to the ship manifest, searching for their best option. Most vessels docked at Epsilon City were military craft with sophisticated security systems and crew complements too large to easily overcome. But there, near the end of the list, he found a possibility. "Research Vessel Athena," Gale read aloud. "Civilian contracted, minimal crew, scheduled for departure in 6 hours. He looked at Kira with the beginnings of a grim smile. That might work. The first step was to leave the security monitoring station without alerting the outpost's surveillance systems. Gale had noted the patrol patterns of the security drones, autonomous machines that swept the corridors at regular intervals, scanning for unauthorized personnel. "Stay close," he instructed Kira as they prepared to venture into the corridor. "These drones are programmed to detect unusual heat signatures or movement patterns." The Cathara nodded, pulling the hood of its cloak lower to conceal its distinctive features. Timing their movement between drone patrols, they slipped into the main corridor and began making their way toward the central elevator hub that would give them access to the lower levels. Gale had modified his identification transponder to broadcast the credentials of a maintenance worker. Not high enough clearance to access restricted areas, but sufficient to avoid immediate suspicion. They had nearly reached the elevator hub when disaster struck. Rounding a corner, they came face to face with a squad of Dorn hegemony warriors, massive, reptilian beings encased in battle armor that amplified their already formidable strength. The lead warrior's yellow eyes narrowed at the sight of Gale and his small, cloaked companion. "Identification," the Dorn demanded, its translator rendering the sibilant native language into harsh, accented standard. Gale stepped forward, keeping his body between the warriors and Kira. "Maintenance technician," he replied, holding up his modified transponder. "Section 12, power distribution." The Dorn warrior leaned closer, its armored helmet scanning the transponder. For a moment, Gale thought the deception might work. Then the warrior's eyes shifted to Kira, and its posture stiffened. "Remove cloak," it ordered, one massive hand moving to the weapon at its side. Gale knew they had seconds before the situation deteriorated completely. "Now, Kira!" he shouted, drawing his pulse pistol and firing at the overhead lighting panel. The corridor plunged into darkness, broken only by the emergency strips along the floor and the glowing indicators on the Dorn warrior's armor. In the confusion, Gale grabbed Kira and sprinted toward the elevator hub, the angry roars of the Dorn squad echoing behind them. Alarms began to blare throughout the facility as they reached the elevators. Gale slammed his hand against the emergency override panel, using a trick he'd learned during his military service to force the doors open. "In!" he urged Kira, helping the small being into the elevator shaft. Instead of waiting for a car, they would climb down the maintenance ladders that ran along the shaft walls, slower but less predictable than using the elevators themselves. They had descended 3 levels when the first energy bolt sizzled past Gale's head, striking the shaft wall with enough force to melt the metal. Looking up, he saw Dorn warriors leaning into the shaft from the open doors above, their weapons charged and ready. "Faster!" Gale called to Kira, who was already moving down the ladder with surprising agility. Another energy bolt narrowly missed them, and Gale knew their descent was too slow. At this rate, they would be hit before reaching the lower levels. He made a split-second decision, grabbing Kira from the ladder and leaping out into the open shaft. For a heart-stopping moment, they were in free fall. Then, Gale managed to catch one of the thick power cables that ran alongside the elevator tracks, using his reinforced gloves to control their slide downward. The cable burned through the material within seconds, but it slowed their descent enough that when they hit the roof of a stationary elevator car 6 levels down, the impact was jarring, but not fatal. Kira rolled with the landing, coming up apparently unharmed. Gale wasn't so fortunate. Pain lanced through his left ankle as he tried to stand, not broken, but definitely sprained. "No time to rest," he muttered, forcing himself upright and prying open the emergency hatch in the elevator car's roof. They dropped into the empty car, and Gale quickly accessed the control panel, overriding the security lockdown to send them plummeting toward the asteroid's core levels. As the elevator descended, Kira moved to Gale's side, placing a small hand on his injured ankle. That now familiar cooling sensation spread through the joint, dulling the pain and reducing the swelling almost immediately. "Thanks," Gale said with genuine gratitude. "You're handy to have around in a crisis." The Cathara's eyes crinkled in what might have been a smile. Their momentary reprieve ended as the elevator slowed, approaching the lowest accessible level. According to the station schematics Gale had memorized, they would still need to navigate through 2 security checkpoints and find a way past the sealed doors to reach Containment Area 7X. "Ready?" Gale asked as the elevator doors prepared to open. Kira nodded, pulling the hood of its cloak back up. The doors slid open to reveal a wide corridor hewn directly from the asteroid's rock, reinforced with metal supports and dimly lit by recessed lighting. Unlike the upper levels with their constant activity, this deep section of the facility seemed almost abandoned. They moved cautiously down the corridor, Gale keeping his pulse pistol ready. The first security checkpoint appeared ahead, a reinforced door with a biometric scanner and 2 automated defense turrets mounted on the ceiling. "This is where it gets tricky," Gale whispered. "Those turrets will activate if we try to bypass the scanner." Kira studied the checkpoint for a moment, then placed a hand on the rocky wall beside them. To Gale's astonishment, frost began to spread from the Cathara's fingers, creeping along the wall and then up toward the ceiling where the turrets were mounted. Within seconds, both weapons were encased in a thick layer of ice, their sensors blinded. "Impressive," Gale acknowledged. "But we still need valid biometrics for the scanner." Kira looked up at him, those violet eyes conveying a clear message. "Trust me." Before Gale could respond, alarms blared again, this time accompanied by a facility-wide announcement. "Alert! Unauthorized use of thermal manipulation detected in Section 22B. All security personnel respond immediately." "So much for stealth," Gale muttered. "Now we run." They sprinted toward the checkpoint, no longer concerned with avoiding detection. Kira reached the biometric scanner first, placing one small hand against its surface. Instead of rejection, the scanner's display flickered wildly before turning green, the reinforced door sliding open with a pneumatic hiss. "How did you—" Gale began, but there was no time for questions. The sound of booted feet and mechanical whirs indicated security forces approaching from both directions. Beyond the checkpoint lay a narrower corridor that wound deeper into the asteroid's core, the artificial lighting giving way to luminescent strips embedded in the rock itself. They ran as fast as Kira's shorter legs would allow, Gale's injured ankle protesting with each step, despite the Cathera's healing touch. The second checkpoint came into view, more sophisticated than the first, with a physical guard station currently unmanned due to the security alert drawing personnel elsewhere. Gale accessed the control panel, attempting to override the door controls. But the security protocols were beyond his ability to crack quickly. "We need another way," he said, scanning their surroundings for alternatives. Kira pointed upward, where a maintenance conduit ran along the ceiling. It was narrow, designed for the facility's service drones, rather than human technicians, but might be large enough for them to squeeze through. Using his pulse pistol to blast away the conduit's access panel, Gale lifted Kira up first, then pulled himself into the tight space with a grunt of effort. They crawled through the dusty passage, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The conduit branched multiple times, but Kira seemed to know which direction to take, leading them unerringly toward their destination. Finally, they reached another access panel that, when removed, revealed a small maintenance chamber directly adjacent to Containment Area 7X. Dropping down into the chamber, Gale found himself facing the final obstacle, a massive door of some unknown alloy, sealed with both mechanical and electronic locks. A control panel nearby displayed warning symbols in multiple languages. The standard version reading, "Danger, Temporal Anomaly Containment, Authorized Personnel Only." "Temporal anomaly?" Gale read aloud, looking at Kira questioningly. "What exactly are we breaking into?" The Cathara approached the sealed door, placing both hands against its surface. Instead of the frost Gale had come to expect, a soft, silver glow emanated from Kira's palms, spreading across the door like liquid moonlight. The massive barrier shuddered, ancient mechanisms groaning to life as locks disengaged one by one. The door began to retract into the surrounding rock with agonizing slowness, revealing a chamber beyond that defied Gale's expectations. Instead of military equipment or weapons, the vast cavern contained what appeared to be a natural formation of crystal structures, massive columns and arches of translucent material that caught the light and refracted it in impossible patterns. At the center stood a particularly large formation that resembled nothing so much as an enormous geode, its interior hollow and filled with smaller crystalline growths. Kira stepped forward reverently, violet eyes wide with what Gale could only interpret as recognition and relief. "What is this place?" Gale asked softly, his voice echoing strangely among the crystal formations. The answer came not from Kira but from behind them, in a cold, precise voice that Gale recognized immediately. "This, human, is what remains of the Cathera Soul Garden, and you have led us right to it." Commander Lyra stood in the doorway, her golden armor reflecting the crystalline light in dazzling patterns. Behind her, a squad of Keth warriors had their weapons trained on Gale and Kira. "Predictable," Lyra continued, stepping into the chamber. "Once we confirmed the creature's identity, it was only a matter of time before it sought out this place." Gale moved protectively in front of Kira, his pulse pistol raised despite the futility of resistance against so many armored warriors. "What exactly is a soul garden?" Lyra's amber eyes studied him with cool assessment. "You truly don't know what you've been protecting, do you?" She gestured toward the crystal formations. "These structures contain the collective consciousness of the Cathera species, or at least fragments of it, the last repository of their psychic imprints, preserved in crystalline matrices. Kira had backed away from both Gale and the Keth warriors, moving deeper into the chamber toward the central geode formation. For a century, the Alliance has kept this place secure, ensuring that no surviving Cathera could access it, Lyra explained, her attention divided between Gale and the retreating Kira. We believed all living specimens had been eliminated, a regrettable necessity for galactic security. Genocide is never a necessity, Gale retorted, his finger tightening on his weapon's trigger. Lyra's expression hardened. You speak from ignorance. The Cathara threatened the very foundation of our societies with their mental abilities. They could not be reasoned with or contained, only eliminated. Or perhaps you feared them because they could make you feel the consequences of your actions, Gale suggested, remembering Tobias's words. Hard to maintain a warrior culture when your soldiers can experience the suffering of their enemies firsthand. Something flickered across Lyra's face, a momentary uncertainty quickly masked by determination. Lower your weapon, she ordered. You cannot win this confrontation. Gale knew she was right. Even with his military training and neural enhancements, he stood no chance against multiple Keth warriors in their advanced battle armor. But surrender meant death for Kira, and likely for himself as well. Behind him, Kira had reached the central crystal formation. As Gale watched, the Cathera placed both hands against its surface, and the entire structure began to glow with increasing intensity. Stop it! Lyra shouted, raising her own weapon. Fire on the creature! Energy bolts lanced through the chamber, but an invisible barrier seemed to deflect them before they could reach Kira. The temperature dropped precipitously, frost forming on the warrior's armor and weapons freezing in their hands. The crystal formation pulsed with light, and Gale felt a strange pressure building in his mind. Not painful, but intense, like a voice trying to speak in a language he almost understood. Lyra staggered, dropping her weapon as both hands flew to her helmet. The other warriors showed similar signs of distress, some falling to their knees. What's happening? Gale called to Kira, who stood at the center of the growing maelstrom of light and psychic energy. The answer came not in words, but in images and emotions that flooded Gale's consciousness. The history of the Cathera. Their evolution as psychic cultivators who had once served as mediators between the aggressive species of the galaxy. Their philosophy of shared experience and understanding. Their systematic extermination by fearful warrior races. And most powerfully, the purpose of this crystal chamber, not merely a repository of memories, but a nursery of sorts, where the psychic essences of unborn Cathera waited for compatible hosts to continue their species' legacy. Kira had not been seeking refuge. It had been seeking rebirth for its kind. The pressure in Gale's mind intensified, and he found himself moving forward, drawn toward Kira and the glowing crystal. Lyra, too, seemed pulled by the same force, her resistance weakening with each step. As Gale reached Kira's side, the Cathara turned to face him, those violet eyes now blazing with inner light. One small hand reached out toward him, while the other extended toward Lyra, who had approached from the opposite direction. Understanding dawned on Gale. A proximity bond, he whispered. You're creating a three-way connection. Kira nodded, and Gale made his choice. He took the offered hand. The moment of contact brought an explosion of sensation, unlike anything Gale had experienced before. His consciousness expanded outward, encompassing Kira's alien perspective and, astonishingly, Lyra's as well. He felt the Keth commander's shock, her deeply ingrained prejudices battling with the undeniable reality of the Cathera's true nature. Through Kira, they both experienced the tragedy of a species nearly extinguished by fear and misunderstanding. Through Lyra, Gale understood the rigid honor code and generational indoctrination that had shaped her into a weapon against perceived threats. And through Gale, both alien minds tasted human empathy and adaptability. The bond deepened, transcending language and cultural barriers, creating a synthesis of understanding that transformed perception itself. In that moment, they were neither human, nor Keth, nor Cathera, but something new, a harmonized consciousness that recognized both the uniqueness of individual experience and the profound potential of shared awareness. Outside their linked minds, the crystal chamber pulsed with energy that spread throughout the asteroid base. Every sentient being within range felt a momentary touch of the proximity bond, not the full immersion that Gale, Lyra, and Kira experienced, but enough to shake certainties and awaken questions. When the energy finally receded, Gale found himself on his knees, still holding Kira's hand. Across from them, Lyra had removed her helmet entirely, her golden features transformed by an expression of profound shock. "All this time," she whispered, "everything we were taught about the Cathara, it was wrong." Kira released their hands, but maintained the psychic connection established between them, allowing wordless communication to flow. "The Alliance fleet approaches," came Lyra's thought, her military training automatically assessing tactical realities even as her worldview crumbled. "They detected the psychic surge and will assume the worst. We have perhaps an hour before they arrive in force." "We need to reach the research vessel," Gale responded through the link. "The Athena is our best chance to escape." "But where would we go?" Lyra questioned, her internal conflict evident in the emotional undercurrent of her thoughts. "The entire Alliance will hunt us." Kira's mental voice entered their shared consciousness for the first time, not in words but in concepts and images that formed a coherent message. "The Crystal Isle awaits, the seed bank of our consciousness. We must bring the soul shards to be reborn." Gale understood. The crystalline formations in this chamber contained the psychic imprints of Cathera, who had perished, incomplete personalities, but the building blocks from which new individuals could develop with the right guidance. "If we help you," Lyra thought, "we become enemies of the Alliance. My house, my people, would disown me at best, execute me at worst. And I'm already a wanted criminal," Gale added. "But after what we've experienced, can we really walk away?" The proximity bond pulsed with emotions too complex for words. Lyra's conflict between duty and newfound understanding. Gale's protective instinct and yearning for purpose beyond revenge. Kira's hope and determination to revive what had been nearly lost. Finally, Lyra stood, her decision made. "We need to move quickly," she said aloud, turning to her warriors who stood in confused silence, their weapons lowered. "Prepare extraction of the primary crystal matrix. Priority Alpha." To Gale's surprise, the warriors obeyed without question, moving to secure the central formation and smaller crystal shards. "They're still bonded to you through their neural implants," Lyra explained, sensing his confusion. "And they experienced enough of the proximity bond to shake their conditioning. They'll follow my lead, for now." "And when the Alliance fleet arrives?" Gale asked. Lyra's amber eyes hardened with determination. "Then we show them what a Keth warrior, a human soldier, and the last Cathara can accomplish together." The next hour passed in a blur of coordinated activity. While Lyra's warriors extracted the crystal formations and prepared them for transport, Gale accessed the facility's communication system to monitor the approaching Alliance fleet. Kira moved between them, maintaining the proximity bond that allowed them to coordinate without words. When reports indicated the fleet had entered the Epsilon City system, they put their escape plan into motion. Using Lyra's command codes, they secured access to the research vessel Athena, neutralizing its small crew with non-lethal stun weapons rather than killing them. "The proximity bond is changing us already," Gale noted as they loaded the crystal containers aboard the ship. "Perhaps for the better," Lyra replied, her tone suggesting this was still a difficult concept for her warrior mindset to accept. The Athena's engines were powering up when the first Alliance warships entered orbit around the asteroid base. Commands to stand down and prepare for boarding echoed through the communication channels. "We're out of time," Gale announced from the pilot's seat, his military training allowing him to operate the unfamiliar vessel with reasonable competence. Lyra took the co-pilot position, her armor interfacing with the ship's tactical systems. "The docking clamps are still engaged. We cannot break free without authorization codes." Kira, standing between them, placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Through the proximity bond came a surge of determination and a clear directive. Together. Understanding flowed between them, and they acted as one. Gale's fingers flew across the propulsion controls, channeling power to the engines in a precise sequence. Simultaneously, Lyra accessed the defensive systems, creating a localized electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled the docking clamp's electronic locks. In the crucial seconds before the base's systems could recover, Kira channeled its crystalline energy through the ship's hull, encasing the mechanical restraints in a layer of ice that shattered when the engines fired at full thrust. The Athena broke free with a lurch that would have thrown them from their seats if not for the restraint systems. Behind them, the asteroid base's defensive weapons began to track their position. "They're targeting our engines," Lyra reported, her connection to the tactical display providing real-time information. "Evasive maneuvers." Gale banked the ship sharply, narrowly avoiding the first salvo of energy weapons. "We can't outrun a military fleet," he warned. "We need a distraction." Through their shared connection, Kira suggested a possibility, using the psychic energy accumulated from the crystal matrix to create what the Cathera called a mindstorm, a projection of psychic force that could temporarily disrupt conscious thought in those it touched. "It won't harm them," Kira assured, "but it will confuse their tactical coordination long enough for us to reach hyperspace." The risk was significant. Such a projection would require all three of them to channel the energy, leaving the ship temporarily under automated control. But with Alliance weapons locking onto their position, they had little choice. "Do it," Gale decided, engaging the autopilot. The three joined hands, forming a triangle around the largest crystal container they had brought aboard. As Kira guided them, they opened their minds fully to the proximity bond, allowing the collective psychic energy of generations of Cathara to flow through them. The mindstorm erupted from the Athena like an invisible shockwave, expanding outward to encompass the pursuing fleet. Through their linked consciousness, they felt the momentary confusion and disorientation of hundreds of minds as the psychic energy washed over them. Ship formations faltered. Targeting systems lost lock as their operators struggled to maintain focus. Communications became garbled as translators failed to bridge the gap between suddenly chaotic thought patterns. In that critical window of opportunity, Gale broke the mental link long enough to execute the hyperspace jump. Stars stretched into lines of light, and the Athena leapt away from Epsilon City, leaving the disorganized Alliance fleet behind. As the blue swirl of hyperspace enveloped the viewports, the three collapsed into exhaustion, the proximity bond fading to a gentler connection that allowed them to sense each other's presence without the overwhelming intensity of full mental fusion. "We did it," Gale breathed, scarcely believing their escape. "For now," Lyra cautioned, ever the tactical thinker. "The Alliance will recover and pursue. We have bought time. Nothing more." Kira moved between them, placing a small hand on each of their arms. The touch conveyed gratitude, but also determination. Their journey was just beginning. Through the fading proximity bond, Gale caught glimpses of their destination, a world far from Alliance space, its surface largely covered in crystalline formations similar to those they had rescued from Epsilon City, but on a vast scale. The Crystal Isle, last sanctuary of the Cathara. "How will we find it?" he asked aloud. "Do you have coordinates?" Kira's response flowed through their connection. Not precise, stellar coordinates, but a pattern. A unique configuration of energy that the crystals themselves would be drawn toward as they approached. A psychic homing beacon, Lyra translated, her scientific training allowing her to grasp concepts her warrior culture had previously dismissed as mysticism. Ingenious. As hyperspace carried them toward uncertainty, Gale found himself contemplating the strange turn of fate that had brought them together. A broken human soldier, a Keth warrior commander, and the last living Cathara. Three beings who, by all logic, should have been enemies. Yet, here they were, united by a bond that transcended species and conditioning. Whatever awaited them at the Crystal Isle, they would face it as something new in the galaxy, a harmonized consciousness that might, perhaps, offer a different path forward than the cycle of fear and destruction that had nearly erased the Cathara from existence. Kira curled up between them, violet eyes closing in exhausted sleep. Through the proximity bond, Gale sensed the Cathara's dream, a vision of crystal gardens alive with silver-furred beings, their psychic songs creating harmonies beyond physical hearing. A future reborn from the ashes of genocide, a second chance. As the Athena carried them through the starlit void, both Gale and Lyra silently vowed to make that dream a reality, whatever the cost. The journey to the Crystal Isle took 17 days in hyperspace, following a winding path through uncharted sectors to avoid Alliance patrols. During this time, the proximity bond between Gale, Lyra, and Kira deepened and evolved, transforming from the initial overwhelming flood of shared consciousness into something more sustainable, a constant awareness of each other's emotions and general thoughts, with the ability to open fuller communication when needed. Through this connection, Gale and Lyra learned more about the Cathara and their history than any outside species had ever known. Kira shared memories, not just from its own short life, but from the collective experiences preserved in the crystal matrices they had rescued, generations of knowledge and perspective that painted a vastly different picture than the dangerous mind controllers described in Alliance propaganda. They were cultivators, Lyra said one evening, as they sat in the Athena's small common area, surrounded by the softly glowing crystal containers. Not conquerors or manipulators, but cultivators of consciousness itself. Gale nodded, understanding flowing through their shared awareness. They saw themselves as gardeners of thought, helping other species develop empathy and understanding without imposing their own will, which made them the natural enemy of societies built on hierarchy and conquest, Lyra added, her voice tinged with the shame and revelation that had come from confronting her people's role in the Cathara genocide. Kira, sitting cross-legged among the crystals, conveyed a gentle correction through their bond. Not enemies. We never saw any species as enemies, only as minds not yet ready to flower. This perspective, alien and yet profoundly wise, had begun to reshape both Gale and Lyra in subtle ways. Gale found the burning need for vengeance that had driven him since his family's death, gradually transforming into something more constructive, a desire to protect and nurture what remained of the Cathara legacy. Lyra, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile her warrior training with her growing understanding of the Cathara philosophy, her rigid certainties crumbling in the face of experienced truth. On the final day of their journey, Kira led them to the Athena's bridge, where the view screen showed only the swirling blue patterns of hyperspace. Through their bond, the Cathara conveyed that it was time to leave the established hyperspace lanes and follow the psychic beacon that would lead them to the Crystal Isle. The navigation computer can't plot this course, Gale warned, studying the controls. We'll be flying blind. Lyra, who had removed her golden armor days ago in favor of the simpler clothing found aboard the research vessel, placed a hand on his shoulder. Not blind, she corrected. We have Kira's guidance. Together, they disengaged the automated navigation systems and allowed Kira to direct them through a series of manual adjustments to their course. The hyperspace patterns around the ship shifted, taking on new configurations that neither human nor Keth had ever witnessed. Crystalline structures forming and dissolving in the dimensional flux. When they finally emerged from hyperspace, the sight that greeted them stole the breath from Gale's lungs. Before them hung a world unlike any in known space. Not a conventional planet with continents and oceans, but a massive crystalline structure that seemed to have grown organically in the void. Its surface sparkled with countless facets that caught the light of the nearby star, refracting it into cascades of color that danced across the Athena's viewports. "The Crystal Isle," Lyra whispered, awe evident in her voice despite her military discipline. Kira stood between them, violet eyes reflecting the rainbow light of their destination, projecting a sense of homecoming so powerful that both Gale and Lyra felt tears spring to their eyes. As the Athena approached, they detected no artificial defense systems or technology of any kind. Instead, the crystalline world seemed to respond to their presence, or, more specifically, to the crystal matrices they had brought from Epsilon City. Sections of the crystal surface began to illuminate in patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the glow emanating from their rescued shards. "It's recognizing the fragments," Gale observed, watching in fascination as the patterns spread across the crystalline world's surface. Lyra, ever cautious despite their shared bond, monitored the ship's sensors. "I'm detecting an opening forming in the outer layer. Some kind of docking bay, perhaps?" Indeed, a portion of the crystalline structure was reconfiguring itself, facets sliding and rotating to create an aperture large enough for the Athena to enter. Through their proximity bond, Kira conveyed certainty. This was an invitation, not a trap. "Taking us in," Gale announced, guiding the ship toward the opening with delicate adjustments to the thrusters. As they passed through the crystalline gateway, the external light of the star gave way to an inner illumination that seemed to emanate from the structure itself. The Athena entered a vast chamber, whose walls, floor, and ceiling were composed entirely of crystalline formations that ranged from completely transparent to opaque silver. At the center of the chamber stood what appeared to be a raised platform of milky crystal, surrounded by smaller formations arranged in concentric circles. "A landing pad?" Gale guessed, bringing the ship down gently onto the platform. Through their bond, Kira corrected, "A welcoming cradle, the heart center of the garden." When they disembarked, the sensation of stepping onto the crystal surface was unlike anything Gale had experienced. Not solid like stone or metal, but not quite yielding either. It seemed to respond to their weight with subtle adjustments, creating perfect stability with each step. The air inside the crystal world was breathable but different from standard atmospheres, slightly denser, carrying scents that reminded Gale of mountain streams and electric storms. Lyra noted that her enhanced senses detected trace elements not found in any known planetary composition. Kira moved ahead of them with newfound energy, its small form almost dancing across the crystal floor. Through their bond, they felt the Cathara's joy and relief at reaching this sanctuary, but also a sense of solemn purpose. "We must bring the soul shards to the nurturing chambers," Kira communicated, indicating the containers they had transported from Epsilon City. Working together, they unloaded the crystal matrices from the Athena and followed Kira deeper into the crystalline world. The passages they traversed seemed to form as they approached, crystal facets shifting and realigning to create corridors where none had existed moments before. "This entire structure is responsive," Lyra observed with scientific curiosity. "Not mechanical technology, but something else entirely." "Psychic architecture," Gale suggested, the concept forming in his mind through their shared connection with Kira. The crystal responds to thought and need. After traversing several such self-forming passages, they entered a vast central chamber that took their breath away. Unlike the angular formations they had seen thus far, this space was dominated by gently curved crystal growths that resembled nothing so much as enormous flowers, frozen in mid-bloom. Each flower contained a hollow center, filled with a luminescent mist that shifted through colors too subtle for human or Keth eyes to fully distinguish. Kira approached one particularly large formation and placed a hand against its surface. In response, the crystal petals opened wider, revealing the misty interior more fully. The cradles await the soul shards, Kira explained through their bond. Each shard contains fragments of many Cathara consciousness. Here, they can be nurtured, allowed to recombine, and eventually rebirth. Rebirth how? Lyra asked aloud, though her question flowed through their mental connection as well. Without physical bodies. Kira's response came as a series of images and concepts. The crystal itself would form new physical vessels, grown over decades or centuries, shaped by the consciousness within. The Cathara had always been as much energy as matter, their silver-furred forms merely the most convenient physical expression of their essential nature. Under Kira's guidance, they began the careful process of transferring the crystal matrices from their transport containers into the waiting cradles. Each transfer required all three of them working in harmony, Gale and Lyra carefully positioning each shard while Kira established the psychic connection that would integrate it with the larger structure. As each crystal found its place, a subtle change rippled through the chamber, the luminescent mist growing brighter, the ambient hum of energy more pronounced. Through their proximity bond, they sensed awakening awareness, not fully conscious, but stirring with potential. When the final shard had been placed, Kira led them to the center of the chamber, where a formation resembling a shallow bowl had emerged from the floor. The Cathara knelt beside it, gesturing for Gale and Lyra to join in a circle around the crystalline depression. Now, we plant the seed of connection, Kira communicated. The proximity bond we share must extend to the soul shards, creating the network that will nurture their growth. Will this harm us? Lyra asked, her warrior's caution still present despite all they had experienced. Kira's response carried gentle reassurance. No harm, but change. The bond will remain, but evolve. You will keep your separate selves, but carry a piece of Cathara awareness within you always. Gale and Lyra exchanged glances, volumes of thought passing between them through their connection. In the days since their escape from Epsilon City, they had both come to value the proximity bond, the sense of never being truly alone, of being understood at a level beyond words. The prospect of deepening that connection rather than losing it was more appealing than either would have expected before meeting Kira. We're ready, Gale said for both of them, taking Lyra's hand on one side and Kira's on the other, completing the circle around the crystal bowl. What followed defied later description, even between the three of them with their shared consciousness. The proximity bond expanded exponentially, connecting not just their three minds, but the hundreds of fragmentary consciousness contained in the crystal shards throughout the chamber, past and present, individual and collective, all flowed together in a symphony of awareness that transcended ordinary perception. Gale experienced lifetimes, not his own, the ancient memories of Cathara, who had witnessed the birth of stars and the rise of countless civilizations. Lyra's ordered mind absorbed philosophical concepts that her people had dismissed as impossible, each revelation transforming her understanding of reality. And Kira, the last living Cathara, became momentarily the focus of all that remained of its species' collective wisdom and experience. When the expanded consciousness finally receded, leaving them once again primarily themselves, but forever changed, they found the crystal bowl at the center of their circle had filled with a silvery liquid that pulsed with inner light. The seed water, Kira explained, its mental voice stronger and more defined than before. From this, new Cathara will eventually grow, guided by the soul shards. How long? Gale asked, still dazed from the intensity of their shared experience. Generations, came the response. tinged with both sadness and hope. The first new births may come within your lifetimes, but the full restoration of my people will take centuries. Lyra studied the luminescent liquid thoughtfully. The Alliance will never stop searching for this place. They'll see a resurgent Cathera population as a threat to everything they've built. Then we'll have to make sure they never find it, Gale said with quiet determination. Through their bond, Kira conveyed agreement, along with a plan already forming. The Crystal Isle could shift its position in space, moving through dimensions in ways that conventional tracking could not follow. With the energy of the awakening soul shards, it could remain hidden until the new generation of Cathara was ready to re-emerge. But there was more to the plan. As Kira revealed through their connection, the three of them, Human, Keth, and Cathera, had a crucial role to play. They would become emissaries to the wider galaxy, carrying the seed of understanding that the proximity bond had planted within them. The Alliance feared us because they did not understand. Kira communicated, "You two now carry that understanding and can share it in ways I alone cannot." You want us to change the Alliance from within, Lyra realized, her tactical mind grasping the strategy. To prepare them for the eventual return of the Cathara. To prepare them for cooperation rather than fear, Kira corrected gently. Not for our sake alone, but for all species. The enormity of the task ahead was daunting. But through their shared bond, neither Gale nor Lyra felt overwhelmed. The perspective gained from the Cathera consciousness had given them a patience and resilience beyond their previous limitations. Where do we begin? Gale asked, his mind already turning to practical considerations. Over the next several days, as the Crystal Isle shifted its position to a safer region of space, they developed their strategy. Lyra, as a high-ranking member of House Keth, would return to her people, not as a fugitive, but as an ambassador, using her status to demand a formal hearing before the Alliance Council regarding the true nature of the Cathara. They will resist, she acknowledged. Centuries of propaganda cannot be overturned in a single testimony. But the seed will be planted, Gale pointed out, and you won't be alone. Indeed. They had discovered during their expanded connection with the crystal matrices that several other species within the Alliance had members who had experienced proximity bonds with Cathera before the Purge. Some still lived, carrying those memories but afraid to speak of them. Lyra would seek these individuals out, forming a network of allies across species boundaries. Gale's role would be different but complementary. Using his connections in the Outer Rim and his reputation as a liberator of slaves, he would work from the fringes of Alliance space, creating safe havens for those who embraced the philosophy of shared understanding that the Cathara had championed. And Kira would move between them, maintaining their trilateral bond while helping to nurture the awakening consciousness in the Crystal Isle. The Cathara could not yet risk broad exposure, but could work through the network that Gale and Lyra established, offering carefully controlled proximity bonds to selected individuals who might become allies. It was a plan measured not in days or months, but in years and decades, a patient seeding of change throughout the galaxy, preparing the ground for a future where the Cathara might return not as threats, but as partners. On their final night together before separating to begin their respective missions, they stood on a high crystalline prominence that offered a view of the starscape beyond the Isle's transparent outer layer. The proximity bond flowed easily between them now, allowing a perfect communion of thought and feeling without words. In this shared awareness, Gale reflected on the strange path that had led him from grief-stricken vengeance to this moment of purpose. The loss of his family would never cease to pain him, but it had been transformed from a wound that drove him to violence into a wellspring of determination to create a better galaxy for all species. Lyra contemplated her own journey from rigid warrior to something more complex, neither abandoning her people's strengths nor remaining blind to their flaws. The honor she had once defined solely through combat and duty now encompassed a broader understanding of justice and connection. And Kira, last of the living Cathara but now caretaker for the rebirth of an entire species, shared with them both a vision of the future, crystal gardens spreading their enlightenment across the stars, not through conquest, but through invitation and understanding. As the stars wheeled slowly overhead, the three beings from vastly different origins, but now inextricably connected, sat in perfect silence, their minds dancing together in patterns as complex and beautiful as the crystal world that sheltered them. The next morning, preparations were made for Gale and Lyra's departure. The Athena would take Lyra back to Keth territory, where she would begin the delicate process of presenting her case to her house elders. Gale would disembark at a neutral trading post, using his underground connections to establish the first of many safe havens. As they stood at the entry to the crystalline docking bay, where the Athena waited, Kira presented each of them with a small crystal shard that pulsed with the same silvery light as the seed water in the central chamber. "Anchors for our bond," the Cathara explained. "Distance will test our connection, but these will help maintain it, no matter how far apart we travel." Gale carefully secured his crystal in a protective case worn close to his heart. Lyra integrated hers into her restored battle armor, where it glowed softly behind a protective covering. No tearful goodbyes were necessary between beings who would remain connected in mind and purpose despite physical separation. Instead, they shared a final moment of complete openness through their proximity bond, a perfect understanding that would sustain them through the challenges ahead. As the Athena departed from the Crystal Isle, bearing Gale and Lyra back toward the complicated politics of Alliance space, Kira remained at the crystalline gateway, a small, silver figure against the vast, luminescent backdrop of the Soul Garden. Through their bond, the Cathara's parting thought reached them with perfect clarity. What seems an ending is merely transformation. What appears as separation is but the stretching of connection across distance. We are the gardeners of a new understanding, and the seeds we plant today will flower in minds yet unborn. The sentiment echoed in both Gale and Lyra's consciousness as the Crystal Isle receded from view, eventually disappearing into a dimensional shift that hid it from conventional space. Though the visible connection was broken, the bond between them remained, a bridge between species, a promise of reconciliation, and the first tender shoot of a future where understanding might finally triumph over fear. As the Athena entered hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain but purposeful future, Gale allowed himself a moment of genuine hope, something he had not felt since the day he lost his family. Beside him, Lyra's amber eyes reflected the same emotion, her warrior's face softened by the wisdom they now shared. The story of the Cathara's extinction had been transformed into a story of rebirth. And in that transformation, perhaps the entire galaxy might find a new path forward, one garden of shared consciousness at a time.